The other day, a client asked me, can I use off-the-shelf norm groups, or do we need to create our own in order to use these assessments for selection? And I was taken back a little bit because we offer off-the-shelf norm groups 99% of the time. That's all that ever needs to be used. But it is an interesting question. Always the question between being specific and being general. Now, norm groups are collections of previous scores, ideally from a specific population, so that you can benchmark, so that you can derive a score. So if your candidate's at the 50th percentile relative to the chosen norm group, they're exactly in the middle. And it's useful to know because otherwise you wouldn't know where they are. If you don't have that sort of benchmark data, a raw score where they got 60 out of 100 is useless. That could be high, that could be low, that could be average. You don't know unless you know. And that's what a norm group does. Now, whenever you bring an assessment to market, it's going to need norm groups. Has to. Otherwise you won't be able to derive scores, you won't be able to rank all the candidates, you won't be able to determine their likely quality of hire. Makes them useless. But there is always the question is are these relevant to our candidates? Are they relevant to our occupations, our organization? Almost always yes. Now, there may be some situations where a role is so niche that there's no real analog for it, but that's very rare. Usually it's just people are concerned that their organizational culture is so unusual that for some reason their applicants are just going to score wildly different to the norm group average. In my experience, that is almost never the case. Usually the complaint is that the candidate scores on the basis of the norm group are just a little bit too average. That's almost always what happens once you get your data. Norm groups are usually pretty accurate. And when they're not, certainly it makes sense to do local norms. Additionally, you can always start with off-the-shelf norm groups, which again almost always work well for people. And indeed, if it picks up differences, that might be useful information too, particularly for cognitive assessment. If you just happen to have a really high quality of hire, you get very good applicants, they score higher than the norm group average, that's not a problem inherently. That's reinforcing the fact that you have unusually good candidates. That's a good thing. But as you collect data, that can be turned into a local organization specific norm group. It's not necessarily an either or, and there's no cost fundamentally, there's no risk fundamentally with doing that. It just improves the measurement, re-centralizes things, makes the scores more in line with the normal distribution. So it's worth considering, but it's not something to get obsessed about. Norm groups off the shelf are almost always adequate to start. You can always move to a local norm later.